Buenas tardes, en nombre del Museo Picasso Málaga, y bienvenidos al encuentro Pablo Picasso, Estructuras de la Invención. Saludar también a aquellos que nos están siguiendo a través del canal de YouTube. Hoy se inaugura al público la exposición Pablo Picasso, Estructuras de la Invención, la unidad de una obra. En ese contexto y como parte de un extenso programa de actividades que vamos a desarrollar a lo largo de los próximos meses y los próximos años, realizamos este encuentro que propone reflexionar y debatir sobre las cuestiones que se abordan en el nuevo montaje expositivo. Para ello contamos con la participación de Michael Fitzgerald, comisario de la exposición y profesor de Historia del Arte del Trinity College de Hartford, en Connecticut, a quien damos las gracias por estar aquí hoy, al igual que al grupo de investigadores involucrados en el programa de investigación de la Fundación Almin y Bernard Picasso para el Arte, quienes han desarrollado dentro de las salas de la colección 5 focus que profundizan en cuestiones centrales para el desarrollo artístico de Picasso y que se exploran en este encuentro. Ellos son Joshua Cohen, profesor asociado de Historia del Arte del City College de Nueva York and Canning Graduate Center, Meta Balusaitite, no sé si lo pronuncio bien, Meta, historiadora del arte y comisaria independiente, Rocío Robles Tardío, profesora titular del Departamento de Historia del Arte de la Universidad Complutense de Madrid, Blair Harzer, historiadora del arte y comisaria independiente, Giovanni Cassini, profesora ayudante de la Universidad de Torino. Y tras la intervención de estos investigadores haremos una breve pausa, seguida de una mesa moderada por Finocchio, profesor senior asociado de investigación, a quien también damos las gracias por su participación. Además, tendremos unos minutos para algunas preguntas y cuestiones que puedan surgir aquí en este auditorio. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí y, bueno, comenzamos. Gracias.
So, hello everyone. Hope you can hear me. I apologize for speaking in English. I am a limited person in many ways, and my inability to speak Spanish is one of those for which I am most regretful, but such is the situation. So, I'm very happy to see you here. I hope you've had an opportunity to see the exhibition. If you have not, certainly please do so soon. And perhaps what you hear from us this evening will be of use to you in viewing the exhibition. It is really our intention to orient you as much as possible towards the exhibition and all that we hope that you will learn there. I have many thanks to give, and I won't be able to name everyone who has contributed so much to the exhibition, but of course I would particularly like to thank Bernard Ruiz Picasso for having invited me to undertake this project 3 or so years ago, and who has worked very closely with us and really been a major contributor to the development of the ideas and the realization of the project. Also to Miguel Lopez Ramiro, who since his arrival here at the museum has been a great supporter, encouragement, contributor to actually realizing the exhibition here in the galleries of the museum. I have to thank Pauline Vidal and Geraldine Mercier, who've worked with me through these years, through FABA, the foundation of Bernard Picasso, in formulating the ideas of the exhibition, and also with Ross Finocchio here and our 5 scholars, as we call them, who have contributed to the ideas of the exhibition and have formed their own exhibitions within the larger run of the galleries next door. So all of them are major contributors to the formation of this exhibition, which I think has a format which is an unusual one, in part because we have these contributors who are not simply writing an essay for the catalog, they're doing that, but also have sections within the exhibition itself to present their ideas. The development of an exhibition is a very long process. We've worked on this for about 3 years, and in the installation of the exhibition, we worked closely with Sofia Diaz here at the museum in formulating the presentation, the subtle choices that one makes in moving from a set of objects to a set of works, of objects that are placed on the walls of the museum. One of the most frustrating things, I think, for a curator is the fact that after all of this effort, the years usually, of putting together an exhibition, it stays on the walls only a short period of time, usually a few months, perhaps 6 months, if one is lucky, but in this case we have 3 years. There will be some changes during that period, but basically the exhibition is here to stay. And why it's so frustrating for curators, besides the fact that they put so much time in and it's up on the walls so slowly, so briefly, is that seeing the works together, seeing the individual works clearly, it often brings up more questions. In a sense, the exhibition, if it's good, if it's provocative, it prompts more questions than it answers. And there's never enough time as we examine the works in the exhibition in the galleries to try to solve those problems. We have to move on to something else. But now, with 3 years, I think we have the possibility not just to identify problems that we would like to solve, but also to have the potential of solving them, of doing the research, of doing the interpretation. So in this case, I would say that the exhibition is definitely the beginning of the process rather than the end. And I encourage all of you who, whether you're scholars of Picasso's work, whether you're simply individuals who are interested in it, to contribute to that process. Join in the effort to interpret, to identify problems. Give us your ideas. Give us solutions as we're working on how we can better understand this large body of work, almost 150 works of Picasso stretching across his career that are on view in the galleries. It's very much an ongoing situation. It's a situation that's alive rather than simply in the can, as we would say, settled in the book and done. It's something still developing. So with that preamble, let me bring up some images and we will begin. Okay, we have that. So perhaps we could, oh, no, we had that, so I should bring it back. Okay, thank you. So I'm beginning with this photograph by Edward Quinn of Picasso taken in his studio in Cannes, in his home, La Californie, in 1960. And I'm showing it because in many ways it's a paradigm for this exhibition, an inspiration for the viewpoint that we take in this show. So if you see him standing there, you'll see a wider range of his works. There is one prominent work there that is not his. You can see here on the far right, it's a sculpture of the god Ea from Ruturu in the South Seas, but most all of the other works are his. And I think what's most striking about it is the variety of the works, and particularly the varied chronology of the works. So we have here the two brothers from 1906, one of the earliest, and a painting here on the easel from 1907, a whole range of works, ultimately down to this drawing from the 26th of June, 1960, a contemporary work with the photograph that was taken. Now, you might be inclined to say, oh, well, this is just a setup for the camera. They pulled out a lot of works, and it's really not the way Picasso lived. But Edward Quinn said specifically there was no manipulation. This is what he found in the studio. This is the way Picasso was living, and it gives us an idea of how he was thinking, how he was making his work. And this way of combining all of these things together, being able to pick and choose and using this material to create a new work is very much the inspiration for the exhibition. We think of it both as retrospection, looking back across the body of work, and innovation, moving forward with this material that he could gather. So we also have some of his own words to speak about this. You see, art historians have dealt to a large extent with the tremendous diversity of Picasso's work by putting it in categories. You know, that's something we like to do. We make a messy, complicated, extremely long career look like it's simple, each thing in its pigeonholes. So we have the blue period, and we have the rose period, and we have cubism, and so on and on. But just as you see here, this is not the way he lived. There's cubist work, there's blue period work together, there are other things as well. And we have Picasso's own words to support this, famous comments that he made in 1923, one of which was, the several manners I have used in my art must be not considered evolution. Or again, whenever I had something to say, I have said it in the manner in which I have felt it ought to be said. Different motives inevitably require different methods. And then he goes on to say again, this does not imply evolution or progress. So what we are trying to do is to honor his statement, to honor what we see in the images of the way in which he lived. And it's particularly important in the exhibition that we have put on for you to understand that all of the work in the exhibition was work that Picasso kept. Whether it was a very early work or a recent work, it was all in his possession at his death and was distributed through the estate process in the after years. So these are not just works that he made at one point that he might have remembered, but like you see in the photograph here, were a part of his world, his living space in one house or another in which he lived. And so if I make a comparison between an early work and a late work, then you know that these are works that were a part of his life, and not just a part of his memory. So why don't we move forward? Okay. Might as well start with Cubism, probably his greatest contribution to the history of art, and one of the most fascinating, and I can only touch on it in these brief remarks that I'm giving today. But we have here already two very different kinds of pictures. The standing female nude on the left from 1910 and the restaurant from 1914, 4 years later. You know, Cubism was an amazing creation that he and Brock, of course, created in these years around 1909 and 1910. This strictly pictorial, artificial system that made no effort to reproduce the reality as we see it and live it, but had the potential to include every aspect of that reality within the artificial structure of the Cubist framework. So by 1910, it's an almost abstract structure of lines, of shading that exists in a strictly visual world. But then, very soon afterwards, we have these additions of literal things depicted, not described as literal, but as symbols of references that fit within the very flexible framework of Cubism. And of course, Cubism was not a term that he and Brock created. It was thrust upon them, and it's something that they really did not wish to accept, but more or less said that was willing to do it. And there's no division in their work between analytic cubism and synthetic cubism. This is all the suggestion of the art historians trying to bring order to these things. And if you look at this, you know, the restaurant, Picasso is using the framework of Cubism to include so many things outside of what we might think of as the strict avant-garde. he's looking back to the tradition of still life painting in Spain, such an important tradition, and bringing in references to everyday things, and a degree of parody that we find in the comic quality of this painting, as well as, of course, references to the contemporary world, the signage, to the advertising of the world that he was living in Paris at this time. And this is the incredible flexibility of the Cubist framework, that so much can be included without it seeming to be simply a reproduction of the world. But it's this flexibility, this hybrid quality, this combination of very different styles, very different sources of art that we saw in the photograph of his studio, and I think that characterizes his life. And so this is what we're trying to do, to reject the periodization of his work, to say that, well, Cubism occurred from 1908 to 1923, just to pick a sort of general framework that it's often discussed in. Or that his art should be isolated according to where he lived at a certain time, or the woman that he was with at the time, and that we can divide these things into separate periods. He's clearly rejected that. And so what we're trying to do is to create a sense of the unity of his work, the way in which this very complicated, very long career has through lines, that there are processes that suggest his creative approach to the experiences he had and that he chose to record. This is not a simple art, not an art that we can easily divide. Okay. So when you think about Cubism, what is called Cubism at least for most of the rest of us, and you look later in his career, and you look at a painting such as this, a still life of 1944, in which we as art historians tend to be very cautious to talk about Cubism in the 1940s. We think of it back in the teens or the 20s, and somehow it's supposed to be corralled in that early career and not extending. But I think the more we look, the more we see it indeed extends throughout his career to the very end. And there are elements of here that are so distinctly Cubist, particularly these transparent planes on the edge of the table, the glass that we see from the top, as well as the side, the faceting of the pictures, so many things that he's doing in the 1940s, continuing Cubism, not thinking of it as a period, art of a certain period or style, but rather one that continues on beyond that. And as well, if I get the sense of how one, okay. So here we have 1947, a ceramic. And again, we don't tend to think of ceramics in relation to Cubism. Ceramics, in the sort of conventional view, are decorative objects. They're not serious works of art, but I would say this is as serious a Cubist painting as you could make. But it's on a ceramic plate. You can see the multiple views of the glass in white outline as well as gray. Even the tonality of early Cubism is there in the brown slip versus the white. Clearly, this is a Cubist work, whether we want to call it a painting, a ceramic, or whatever it might be, from 1947. So again, we're breaking up the boundaries. We're opening up the flow of his work as we see it. And again, we're showing here works in the exhibition on the screen that remained in his collection, that he knew throughout the remainder of his life after he had made whatever object it might be. One of the most fascinating things in the exhibition, I think, is this sketchbook. We have two of them in the exhibition that he made in the late summer and fall of 1918 after his marriage to the ballerina Olga Kuklova. They came to Biarritz for their honeymoon and stayed in a villa that a patron of his had arranged for them, and he filled sketchbooks with drawings and paintings, even painting walls of the villa with scenes. But this layout of three images, and I think you can see it, but it's a bit hard to see the image on the far right, lays out his menu of styles, the choices that he can make at this point in his career. So, for example, we have the clearly cubist drawing of the man seated at a table. Then next to it, we have a drawing from life. And you can see how tentative this sketch is, the multiple lines that are used to render the fingers, and the irregularity of this finger, not straight, maybe broken or fractured at some point. And specifically, the wedding band on this hand. This is the hand of Olga, of his wife, with the wedding band that has so recently been placed on her in their wedding. So we have a cubist rendering, we have a drawing from life, and then we have this very artificial rendering of a woman in profile, something that seems to look back to the early 19th century and the classical revival of that time. This razor-sharp, even line of the profile of the figure that varies only in weight between the heavy touch of the pencil at the front of the profile and the very light touch in the background. And it's this range of styles as they develop and develop. Picasso doesn't dispose of a style, of an idea. He adds to it. He adds another one as he builds up his repertoire. So that we have Cubism, we have naturalism, and we have a very idealized version of the human form here. Classicism and Cubism particularly working together in these very important years at the end of the teens and into the 1920s. Okay. One other of the sketchbooks of this summer-fall period. This is a very small one that is covered in red silk. It's about 16 centimeters tall by 13 centimeters across, so obviously it's hugely enlarged here. But you can see the inscription on the inside that it was done in Biarritz in La Mimosere, the villa in which they were living at this time. This, of course, is in the exhibition, and you can see both the individual pages as they're turned during the course of the exhibition, and also a very sophisticated screen that allows you to look at every page in succession within the sketchbook. And again, we have these series of related styles in Picasso's work at this time. The Cubist view on the upper left, on the upper right, a much more conventional academic view of a seated woman, and on the lower left, a Cubist figure in which the face of Olga, the hair of Olga are integrated. So we have a combination of a realist image, a Cubist image, and indeed a classical reference as well. And since what interests me the most is this later page in the same little sketchbook, in which again we have a watercolor in this case of a seated figure. You can see the head of the figure, the sides of the chair extending down, but with all of these circles of color in the lower part of this drawing, I think we can see it not only as a figure but as a still life as well. And so we have not just a variety of styles of rendering that Picasso is moving through, but also variations of subject matter, a kind of metamorphosis of subject matter, which becomes of great importance really a decade later with his engagement with surrealism. Speaking of which, so here we have on the left his Metamorphosis, the sculpture of 1927, 1928, bronze cast of a plaster work, which in this really gruesome manipulation of the physical form, of this flow of body from the 1 foot on the ground here up into the mass of the figure and back around down below, the head thrown back against the arm. We have really what you might even think of as an illustration of Breton's idea of convulsive beauty, a powerful, disturbing object that, particularly when you think of him wanting to enlarge this onto a monumental size as a public work, it would indeed have been shocking to the community at that time. The sculpture on the right, I think, is many ways more interesting, and it speaks to our theme of the multiplicity of his styles, of the way in which he creates hybrids out of different traditions, because, of course, it speaks to a classical reference. We might almost think of this as something that was excavated in a dig going back to ancient times in Greece or through the Mediterranean, although, of course, it's not that. But it's made in plaster so that it's suggestive of a marble material. The pose is that we could find in ancient classical art, and even something of the figuration, particularly these vertical lines that would be the folds of an ancient garment, a peplos, that a woman might wear at that time. But beyond that, everything is modern, and it's about the same sort of transformation that we find in the clearly surrealist sculpture on the left. The roughness of the way in which he's articulated much of the figure and of the head itself, and particularly the way in which he's imprinted these different textures on the wet plaster, using some found material, whether it's corrugated cardboard, strips of wood, it's hard to know exactly what, and so that they're turned not only vertically, but horizontally as well. And so this freedom to manipulate, to transform, that you see literally in the Metamorphosis is, I think, more complex and perhaps more interesting here, combining ideas of classicism with surrealism in a single work. It's, again, the hybrid, the combination that I think is really the driving force, and at least for me, the most interesting of these things. I guess the screen likes this one. Okay. All right. So yeah, this one's a little hard to see. I hope you can see it maybe better than I can from the side of the screen, because I'd like to talk about it a little bit. It's a seated man from 1925, and it is an image that is in the exhibition, and I think you might be inclined to pass by, because it's a rather dark picture. It's not as dramatic as a number of the things that are hanging there, but I think in many ways it's a more central, more inspirational image than many of the others in that particular gallery. The face is quite readable. It is not a portrait. It's an idealized image, in that sense, perhaps a reference to a classicizing version of the human figure, but of course it also includes elements of cubism in the profile that you see here versus the full face view, but also the faceting of the figure that articulates part of it. But Picasso has chosen to leave it unfinished, to show us the outline of the chair, of the man's hands coming together down below. And by the way, this is not a white line. When you see the painting itself, you'll see that he has incised it. He's scratched through the green overpainting to the white underpaint of the canvas. So it's physically incised into the canvas as a kind of puzzle that would be completed in the final composition. But he chose not to complete it. He chose to leave it open. And I think one of the most important developments coming out of the general idea of surrealism, the interest in the unpredictable, the spontaneous, that's a part of its methodology, is the willingness to leave his work unfinished so that we can see the process. To a certain extent, we're drawn into his own imagination, his way of working, because we can follow him step by step in creating an image rather than seeing the final work and perhaps not being able to discern how it came about, what choices he was making. Now we can imaginatively stand next to him in doing this. And this engagement with process, this foregrounding of process, is something that would grow more and more prominent in his work through to the very end. Okay. So, if you think of a later work, like, the 1961 Seated Woman, see here, he's taken that willingness to accept the incomplete to a point in which it's emphasized, and it even takes over the entire painting. this freedom of execution, of painting, becomes the subject of the painting. It's not really the seated woman. She is the frame on which the brushstrokes are hung. And it comes, I think, from beginning in the 20s with this willingness to foreground process, to make process a primary subject of the work. So if you go to the very end, to this 1971 painting of the woman and child, we see it becoming even freer. The point that, of course, the face is not articulated at all, and you might say, well, this is simply an unfinished work. It was something left in his studio when he died, and we shouldn't take it seriously as a work of art. However, he did, so perhaps we should. He had chosen to include it in the last exhibition that he organized, but unfortunately did not live to see go up on the wall. So clearly he thought it should be exhibited, however we would like to define it. And I'm pairing it here with a work from the beginning of his career, from the late 1890s, 1898 to 1900, more or less, a portrait of his sister Lola holding a doll on her lap. And the suggestion that, this kind of subject matter of a woman with a child is something that, of course, has a long history in Western art and certainly in Spanish art, but that he would refer to throughout his career, to move from this rather realistic portrait on the left to a stylistic rendering of a radically different nature, and yet he's drawing on these sources. He's returning to them in order to find a new variation. Well, this is the opening gallery of the exhibition. I hope some of you have had a chance to see the show. If you haven't, you will do so, and you can see that what we have is that pair of images. This is our introduction to the question of the continuity, the unity of Picasso's work and the way in which it can be encapsulated, and particularly to this theme of childhood that we see, of course, in the baby on the woman's lap, and in this wonderful sculpture from 1960 of this small child that seems to be tottering around trying to learn how to walk, to engage the world. Because, as we know, at the very end, in these paintings and in others, he returned again and again to the image of the child as an inspiration, as a reflection of his desire to continue to change, to continue to open up his work. So I'm just going to show you a few other galleries of the exhibition, and perhaps to entice you to go if you have not yet seen the show. So this is the second gallery of the exhibition. It's one that deals with Picasso's career from around 1900 to 1907 to the painting of the Demoiselle d'Avignon. And you can see here three, I think, fascinating images of Fernande Olivier, the woman that he was living with at the time, a drawing here, a sculpture of her head, and a painting of her as well. All three of these deal with issues of representation, but particularly of volume in one form or another. The drawing that emphasizes her neck and the volume of her head, the bronze bust of the plaster head of Fernande, and you should look at it very carefully because one side of the face, her left side, is very volumetric and three-dimensional. The right side of the face is entirely flattened to the point that there's almost not an eye, as if there are multiple images of the figure already generating in this very early work, and the way in which he paints Fernande so that she's not just juxtaposed to, but almost combined with the mountain in Gonçal in the pyramid, dealing with the large sense of the relationship of forms that moves across this early work of Picasso's career. We introduce this subject with this ceramic from 1947. So we are mixing up in these galleries early work and late work, trying to establish, or at least suggest, relationships. These are not a question of hunting for sources, of saying this particular work influenced that one. But again, remember, these are all works that he had with him, that he was living with, that were present in his memory and in his physical surroundings. So that there are seeds planted early in the work that continue to flow through into the much later ones. a central gallery of the exhibition, for me, one of the most exciting. You see the run of the wall as you walk into the exhibition. On the left image, these are all images associated with the Second World War, with the period of the occupation, and we very specifically planned a wall of gray, of darkness, that the visitor would confront in coming in. Of course, it's a reference to the black, the white, the gray of Guernica, and the way in which it carries over as an inspiration for this series of paintings. The paintings directly opposite you when you walk into the gallery are these two. This one on the left from 1941, one of the most austere, I think most disturbing paintings of this time, the really gruesome features of the woman's face here, the very liquid painting the way in which it drips and runs down the figure almost like blood, trailing off a figure in this 1941, in this time of the occupation. And then this also very dramatic, large painting, as you can see here, the rooster with its neck cut, the knife here in the bowl to catch its blood, the legs tied up above it as if it were a victim, the bright light up above suggesting Guernica or perhaps a scene of torture of this individual. This painting on the right is not a picture of the war. It's a picture from 1962, from 21 years after the painting on the left. And it's another juxtaposition that suggests the continuities within Picasso's career across decades, across different periods, across conventionally different styles, trying to suggest the unity of the career rather than its separation. The last group, the last galleries of the exhibition, and I'd like to suggest here just the way in which one moves through the exhibition, because we have very carefully orchestrated the experiences that one has in moving from one gallery to another. In this case, it's the last of our focus exhibitions, the one by Giovanni Cassini, which you'll hear more about in just a little bit. Here, the UNESCO mural, which perhaps some of you know, the drawings that are related to it, and indeed this sculpture, which you see again right here, comes right out of the murals. So we pass from the plans for this mural in Paris and UNESCO to the final works. And the theme, again, of childhood, the theme of the water, the playfulness, the swimmers that you see in this painting from the very end of his life, this sculpture, remarkable piece that I hope you'll go and see. You really have to see the assemblage process of it, the found materials, the carved wood, the plaster that he makes into this figure, made in the late 1950s. So 10 years or more before this painting, and then this final image of the child on the beach with the shovel, all of it the world of the Mediterranean, the world where he grew up, Malaga, where he was born, all the way around the coastline to the south of France. So at the end of his career, he's thinking back, he's imagining this, he's inspiring himself with the freedom, the imagination of childhood, of the beach, of the playfulness of it, that he can evoke through these images. There are other sides to this as well, but I think I will stop there. I've taken more than my time, and I thank you for coming and giving me your attention. So I'd like to introduce now Ross Finocchio. He is one of the major contributors to our catalog. He's basically written a book within our book on many of the objects across the range of the exhibition. And before he came to work with us, he was a collaborator with John Richardson on the last volume of his biography, and therefore, of course, is himself a great expert on Picasso, and he will introduce our 5 set of scholars and their individual exhibitions.
thank you, Michael, very much for that overview of the exhibition and some of the ideas behind it. And thank you all for joining our program tonight. One of the very interesting and I think unique aspects of this exhibition is that it encompasses 5 smaller exhibitions which concentrate each on a particular passage of Picasso's life and work. And these smaller focus exhibitions have been curated by a distinguished and international group of scholars, and we're very fortunate to have them all with us tonight. And it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. They'll be speaking about their exhibitions and elaborating on some of the ideas behind them. The first is Joshua Cohen. Joshua Cohen is an associate professor of art history at the City College of New York and the CUNY Graduate Center. He specializes in the art of Francophone West Africa, Southern Africa, and its connections to Europe, the Caribbean, and the United States. His first book, The Black Art Renaissance, African Sculpture and Modernism Across Continents, was published by the University of California Press in 2020. And Professor Cohen will be speaking now on Picasso and African sculpture. So I welcome him to the podium.
Thank you, Ross, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. I believe we're each going to speak for about 10 minutes, so you know what's coming. And I will begin with the admission that curatorial projects on Picasso and African sculpture are nothing new. And such projects date to as early as 1913, when ZIL Bureau has documented Wilhelm Uda organized exhibitions in Berlin and Dresden presenting Cubist works by Picasso alongside several examples of West and Central African statuary. However, from the earliest efforts to show Picasso's art in dialogue with African sculpture, curators have rarely taken great care to identify the specific objects Picasso knew and studied. Diverse works from any given sculptural genre have often seemed interchangeable, and African objects have been recruited to participate in formally striking but historically ungrounded curatorial juxtapositions. A Picasso drawing, a Kota reliquary figure, a wasp's nest, a large decorative bowl. These assembled objects in the landmark exhibition at the 291 Gallery in New York in 1915 illustrate a curatorial tendency to cast relationships between modern and so-called tribal or primitive objects as serendipitous, governed by keywords like affinity, convergence, accident, that serve to mystify debts to non-Western indigenous sources in a tradition that began well before MoMA's notorious Primitivism exhibition of 1984 and has continued since. The major question, in other words, lies not in the topic of Picasso and African sculpture per se, but in how we choose to approach it. The focus exhibition I curated here at MPM aims to distinguish itself in part by disavowing primitivism, a conceptual framework that has guided nearly every curatorial and scholarly project dealing with African sculpture and modernism. Among other problems, my main objection to primitivism is that by privileging origin fantasies as primary drivers of Western engagements with non-Western material cultures, it presumes African sculpture to be safely characterizable as primitive. In addition to abandoning primitivism, my focus exhibition eschews the dominant curatorial strategy of pairing African and modernist works on the basis of perceived formal resemblances but without historical documentation. The exhibition also challenges a common scholarly ambition to identify a single higher order lesson or principle that Picasso might have distilled from African art. Cut loose from these approaches, the exhibition curated presents a selection of Picasso's early African-inspired art alongside African sculptural works acquired by the artist starting around 1910. First, a Wei or Guéret or Wobe female mask from Côte d'Ivoire on the far left, a Galoa male figure from Gabon in the middle, and a Congolese figurative slit gong from Angola on the right. Supplementing this display, photographic reproductions contextualize these and other African works that informed the artist's practice starting around 1906. Even within this relatively small number of works and images, the exhibition highlights a diversity of artistic ideas that Picasso observed in highly varied examples of African sculpture, or in other words, in African sculptural works that are far from uniformly primitive. These works' various points of intersection with Picasso's artistic and collecting practices are not unknowable. In many cases, they can be clearly documented in primary sources and with the help of published research. African sculptural objects in this way become present in the exhibition both materially and in historical photographs, while some of their formal and expressive qualities can be traced in Picasso's art. The exhibition invites us to consider, for example, a bronze cast of Picasso's carved doll, or otherwise known as small figure, and his charcoal on paper bust of a woman, both from 1907. An early point of reference for both of these works is the early 20th century Congolese Congolese statuette acquired by Henri Matisse in fall of 1906. According to several accounts, Picasso held this small charcoal blackened wooden object in his hand one evening that fall and was deeply moved by it, resulting in a furiously scrawled series of radically stylized drawings of a woman's head and shoulders. The doll and the bust of the woman can be understood as eventual and markedly diverse responses to this initial encounter. The bronze doll and its carved wooden original share a number of features with the Congolese statuette: oversized head, pronounced brow, vacant eye sockets, elongated torso, hands coming together in the front of the body, and diminutive legs. Yet neither version of the doll has much in common with the Congolese figure at the level of execution. The Congolese figure's features are relatively fine and its surface contours are smooth, while Picasso's figure is determinedly coarse, with a blocky anatomy, compact architecture, and visible chisel marks. The bust of a woman does not fit exactly with André Salmon's recollection of Picasso's series of drawings made during the night after the encounter with the Congolese statuette of, as he said, a woman's face with but a single eye, a too long nose, confounded with the mouth, a lock of hair on the shoulder. It does, however, resemble Max Jacobs' memory of, as he said, large figures of 1906 with noses attached to the eyes. In any case, the bust of the woman can be conceived as a descendant of that initial African-inspired female form and probably dates to the late summer of 1907, around the same time when, in comparison to previous female heads, Picasso drew a pointier, more angular, and heavily striated version on page 7 of the August 23rd edition of Le Vieux Marcheur newspaper, departing radically from the illustration of a semi-nude woman that appeared on that page. With the advent of Cubism around 1909, Picasso's geometric faceting gradually extended throughout his compositions, integrating figure and ground in what Pierre Dex called a unitary pictorial idiom. In the years that followed, as Picasso's compositions became more fragmented and their subject matter more difficult to decipher, his collection of African and oceanic art swelled, occupying ever more space in his studios and showing up increasingly in photographs. Studio photographs from 1911, for example, show the Gabon figure and the Congolese slit gong in partial views behind the artist Auguste Herbin. And so here you see the Gabon figure, and it's very hard to see, but the top of the slit gong here. And you also see the slit gong again behind Marie Laurencin here. The relationship between the newly unitary canvas and the evolving studio environment seems significant for understanding the function of African objects and aesthetics within Picasso's analytic cubism. In the late 1990s, Dex, exemplifying a primitivist art historical approach and seeking to show how African geometric stylization informed Cubist figuration, looked to a relatively unintegrated canvas of 1911 with a clearly defined central figure and more or less flat background to offer an analogy to a pair of Lobi figures from Burkina Faso that Picasso cannot have seen by 1911. Apart from its implication that Picasso intuited strategies from African objects without needing to study them, this analogy overlooks the clear tendencies we have just noted: Picasso's gradual integration of figure and ground, and the growing presence of African objects in his studio. The so-called discovery of African sculpture by Picasso and other avant-garde artists not only expanded modernism's formal terrain, but it also led to significant shifts in Western tastes and collecting practices. Starting around 1910, objects that had previously been regarded as exotic curios came to be acknowledged as works of aesthetic interest and were increasingly exhibited in commercial galleries and collectors' homes. To build his African collection, Picasso initially shopped at flea markets and curio shops and acquired objects through traders or acquaintances. Eventually, though, he was also in touch with early African art dealers, such as Paul Guillaume, who supplied objects in 1914 for one of the first exhibitions of African sculpture, to present African sculpture as art at Alfred Stieglitz's 291 Gallery. An installation photographed by Stieglitz shows five masks from Côte d'Ivoire dominating the exhibition, including at least two clamshell-eyed Wei Gere or Wobe masks with pointy foreheads in the corner of the room. Here's one, the one that looks most like Picasso's mask, which he had acquired by 1909 when it was credited in an early book on African sculpture by Clouzot and Lavelle. It seems likely then that Picasso acquired this mask from Paul Guillaume. And in any case, this mask, now belonging to a canon, an early canon of African art as it developed in the West, is pictured in a photograph by Picasso of Olga at the piano in Fontainebleau in 1921, hanging above the piano here with a number of other artworks. So to conclude, staged at a moment of growing interest in decolonizing art history and restituting African objects, my focus exhibition addresses a need to critically reframe European modernist borrowings from African art. Read in relation to broader histories of modernism, Picasso's overall engagement with African art stands to be understood as fundamentally ambiguous. There is no question that colonial institutions and practices enabled the artist's access to African collections in Paris, and that colonial-era ideas biased his hazy understandings of African peoples and creative practices. At the same time, Picasso's borrowings from African sculpture eventually set in motion a greater appreciation for African material cultures among Western artists, critics, collectors, and viewing publics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Cohen. Our next scholar that we will hear from is Meta Balushaitita. She is an independent curator in Paris, where she recently completed her doctoral degree at the Université Paris-Nanterre in 2023, and where she formerly worked as a research associate in the Musée National Picasso from 2019 to 2020. Her subject is Picasso on wood.
Thank you, Ross, for introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Michael Fitzgerald and Bernard Ruiz Picasso, for having invited me to join this group of scholars. And thank you to the team of Museo Picasso Malaga and the FABA team for making this possible. And a special thanks goes to FABA's conservator, Emily Faust, who helped me look at things, objects, pictures I will show. We looked at their fronts and also at their backs and discovered some things that I think might be interesting here. And thank you for Bernard for having allowed us to look at the backs of the objects that normally are not easily accessible, so we deframed. Yes, I'll start. I will mostly comment the focus exhibition that you can find in the Gallery 5. Pardon. During his long career that reached almost 80 years, Picasso mostly painted on canvas. What has been less well known is that he also worked on various wooden supports, ranging from thin ready-made panels acquired at art supply shops to found pieces of wood that he reused. The focus exhibition, staged here at Museo Picasso Malaga, brings together a group of paintings in oil and wood, and I see it as a starting point to critically reflect Picasso's engagement with the support. It is important to stress that Picasso did not use wood continuously in his career, but turned to it at different moments, and some of the key moments are at the age of 13, as a boy in La Coruña, again in 1900, 1901, Paris and then Madrid again, then in 1906 and 1908. Here you see a work from 1906 that is in the focus exhibition in the summer of 1914 in Avignon, and above all in the 20s. And here are several works from the focus exhibition that are from the 20s. And beginning in the 30s, Picasso worked regularly on large plywood panels. And here is one work on plywood, also in the focus exhibition. The adjective large that I would use to describe this painting leads me to the question of scale and size, two terms I will use in this paper. I reflect more on them in the essay, which will be in the catalog. It is important to distinguish between size and scale. If the size of an art object is a stable feature, scale is relational. Size can be defined as absolute dimensions of an object and is thus an unchanging category, while scale refers to the way of the object itself as well as the visual elements represented relate among themselves and call into the question the role of the viewer. Why all this matters? When you will be in the exhibition in the Gallery 5, you will be surrounded mostly by tiny works, the 5 works from the left. They are small, but when you go close to them, some of them, the forms appear monumental, while the largest work, it feels smaller. So I stop here and invite you to experience this when you are there. The theoretical question underpinning the research presented in the focus exhibition is simple. What can wood do what paper and canvas cannot? And here words needs to be said about wood as artistic support and its use before Picasso, because of course Picasso invented many things, but not painting on wood. Wooden panels were the most common support in European painting until 16th century. Here, Giotto's Madonna and Child on poplar wood from the early 14th century, and you see the work is not particularly small in size. In the 16th century, wooden supports were mostly replaced by canvas. Before, in the late 18th century, artists turned to wood panels again. Yet, from that moment on, these were mostly small pieces of wood used for rapidly made plain plein air works, so a huge difference from Giotto. Here on screen you see a work by Georges Seurat, painted in 1882, also on a wood panel, outside, quickly on a motif. Now, one of my claims is that Picasso somehow inverted the practice as it was done by Seurat. Instead of working quickly to capture a motif, he repeatedly used such small panels for carefully composed works that can be described as cabinet paintings. In the following couple of minutes or so, I will give several examples from the Focus exhibition that should illustrate such dynamics. Or to put it differently, to observe how Picasso explored wood to often construct monumental forms on small, sometimes tiny panels. Woman and Child, here on the screen from the autumn of 1921, a painting roughly the size of the human hand. It's tiny. It is a little smaller than the hand, is executed with great precision. In size, finish, and subject, it recalls the long Western European tradition of small devotional images of the Madonna and Child. The sense of grandeur that the viewer perceives when looking at the picture and the actual size of the object, it is of 14.8 by 9.7 centimeters, are strikingly discrepant. On this panel, Picasso distorted the bodily proportions of the figure, not only her hand and feet, but also her overall torso, the shoulders, and the breastbone. They all appear expanded, making the tiny giantess recall a sculpted body. Picasso placed the compositional elements of his image on the material surface of the object that was available. He squeezed a mental image on the support he had at hand. As he held the small wooden panel, he had to compress the formats in a way to fit them into the size of the support. The viewer witnesses this complex operation, which is called formatting. The scale of these monumental bodies seemed to saturate the tiny painting. As the woman's head and feet virtually touch the upper and the lower picture frame, she almost fills up the entire pictorial field. Were she able to stand up, she would burst out of the frame. When Picasso painted the small panel, he had to be physically close to it, working like a miniature painter in intimate proximity to the object. Unlike his large format maternities or Bathursts from the same period, the painting cannot be observed from distance. So again, you have to be very close to discover it. And this work is a material thing to be held in the hand, viewed up close and contemplated in a concentrated act. If this work was exhibited to another maternity from the Faber's collection, so here it is again, I think it is striking to see this in such a monumental frame. And if this work would be next to Faber's another maternity, so they would make such a dialogue. It is much smaller. Picasso often added, now I move to another work from the Focus exhibition. Again, here I treat the works as images and not as pictures, so they appear large on screen. Picasso often added a white ground layer to his panels, but he occasionally painted directly on the wood. Here, Head of a Woman from autumn 1906 is one of 5 works on wooden supports executed as early studied for the Demoiselles, today in the collection of Museum of Modern Art. And this cheerful sketch, nearly life-size, the head, demonstrates Picasso's enjoyment in applying and manipulating the fresh wet paint on the smooth ground of the panel. Woman seated in an armchair from 1922 shows Picasso exploiting the effect of the grain of wood for its textural effects. He sketched the figure in pencil on panel, then applied touches of white pigment. The areas of warm brown become an active part of the bourgeois interior in which the woman sits. The label, and here is the story we were able to tell when looking to the backs of the pictures, the label of the supplier, Le Maître, on the back of the painting indicates that Picasso made the work on a commercially produced panel that he acquired at an artist supply shop, which he likely acquired during his vacation in Dinard in Brittany. The same label, this was extremely interesting, appears on the back of another panel of the same size, 19 by 24 centimeters, here used horizontally, entitled or known today under the title Man Looking at a Sleeping Woman, as well from 1922. The oil painting, Journal in Glass, which Picasso made in June 1923, is an eminent example of his games with visual puns and perceptions. It is painted on a wood panel, actually a wooden box, so it is also an almost dry-dimensional object, which, though is invisible, the wood itself, it is covered in white ground, but is echoed and reinstated by the hand-painted wood grain on of the table on which rests the newspaper in glass, a strategy recalling the faubourg practice of Picasso's Cubist years. While the majority of the paintings on wood from the first half of Picasso's career are executed on small, thin panels, in the 30s he moved to large pieces of plywood. Standing Woman from 1946 is a significant example of the smooth surface support used here raw, that is uncoated, without either pigmented primer or a transparent imprimatura. And one last work I am willing to quickly comment on is not directly in the Focus exhibition, but it is connected. You can find it 2 galleries before, exhibited in a very central place. It is Picasso's Fernande with Mantilla from 1906. Besides, and here I comment on it, as besides painting on different commercially produced panels, as we have heard, the panels acquired at Le Maître, for example, Picasso also appropriated found objects. These could be pieces of furniture, such as here, which is the headboard of a bed, on which he portrayed his partner at the time, Fernand Olivier, in the summer of 1906, when the couple were staying in Gozol, Spain, or the lid of the box, as in Journal in Glass. Beginning in his youth, Picasso was committed to finding things and materials that could be used in an unorthodox way. Accident and chance were of great importance to him. We might even think that some of objects, as if they had agency, seeming to call out to him, selecting themselves for his use. Fernand with Mantilla, which Picasso's from the summer, which Picasso spent in Gozol, is a case in point in terms of the artist's inventiveness in reusing everyday materials. And here the likeness of his partner is rendered on a 82 by 63 centimeter wood panel, a shape which is extremely close to a standard figure canvas F25, which is a format traditionally used for the most conventional portraits. So Picasso had to, with his eye, to identify this bed, which was, well, anything else than noble, but had the fitting size. And he squeezed the image in the support available. When we look closely to this work, we notice something what looks like a frame also surrounding the painted surface. Indeed, this frame, almost natural frame as it derives from the bed, is actually a part of this found object, which has been identified as the headboard of a child's bed. It is smaller than an adult bed would otherwise be. Although we know virtually nothing about the provenance of the salvage panel that became the support for this painting, we know from a letter that summer Picasso was short on supplies, hypothesis. But the undertaking of formatting this, pasting a human likeness within a bed of headboard, sits somewhere between opportunistic scavenging and precise preparation. It compares with Picasso's later use of reclaimed objects. In Picasso's hands, different wooden supports do more than just carry an image. Painted over, they also oscillate in status between paintings and semi-portable objects. And I somehow feel that he was simply very good in identifying things that where he could paste an image on one of those surfaces. So just as he experimented with different styles and sizes, so Picasso's works on wood speak eloquently of his purposeful exploration and mastery of forms and surfaces. And thank you.
Our next speaker, Rocío Robles Tardillo, is a professor of art history at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Her research focuses on early 20th century art and visual culture. During a research fellowship in the exhibition department at the Museo Reina Sofía, Dr. Robles Tardillo helped to conceptualize and build a digital archive of historical documents related to Picasso's great painting Guernica, and it is a major and essential research tool for anyone interested and working on that painting, and one that we used all the time in the writing of the fourth volume of Picasso's biography by John Richardson. She has also curated a number of exhibitions, authored and edited a number of related publications. For example, she was the editor of a 2-volume anthology, Picasso y sus críticos, Volume 1, Recepción del Guernica, and Picasso y sus críticos, Volume 2, Los Años Comunistas. Her topic today and in our exhibition is the plaster sculptures, the 30s. And I welcome her to the podium.
Muchas gracias, Ros, por la presentación. Yo también quiero dedicar estos primeros segundos de mi intervención a darle las gracias a Bernard Ruiz Picasso y a Michael Fitzgerald por invitarme a participar en este proyecto de investigación desarrollado en el tiempo, y también el acompañamiento de todo el equipo de la Fundación Almin y Bernard Ruiz Picasso, que ha hecho posible, ¿no?, que como el resto de mis compañeros estemos aquí, presentemos, ¿no?, hayamos desarrollado nuestras investigaciones, y también, ¿no?, gracias a esa doble invitación, esta segunda invitación por parte de Michael, de formar parte, de acompañar también su fantástica, ¿no?, yo creo que original propuesta expositiva, que hoy también celebramos, ¿no? Para empezar, cuando me incorporo, ¿no?, digamos, el tema marco del que partía para el desarrollo de mi investigación y que luego ha cristalizado en el foco que he presentado, que se presenta en el marco de la exposición. Este tema marco, como digo, era el concepto de clasicismo. Me interesaba el término como categoría y en particular aplicado al estudio de Pablo Picasso, y estudiarlo dentro del debate y desde la revisión historiográfica acerca de si clasicismo era una etapa concreta dentro de las propuestas de estudio de la trayectoria de Picasso articulada en periodos, con todos los problemas que este modelo de ordenación reductiva conlleva, y que creo que, como Michael Fitzgerald ha explicado antes, ¿no?, y yo creo que también considero, tiene, ¿no?, esos problemas, ¿no? Hay que someter a crisis, ¿no?, toda esta reducción por etapas o por unas categorías, ¿no? O también entender el concepto, ¿no?, esta categoría de clasicismo como un principio de creación situado y reconocible a lo largo o en distintos momentos de la vida del artista y en su trayectoria, en su producción artística. Mi foco, pero también, ¿no?, la investigación digamos, más amplia y que está incorporada, ¿no?, que formará parte del catálogo que acompaña esta exposición, se ha centrado en el binomio Picasso-Boigeloup, referido a la década de 1930, como dice el título, ¿no? Un momento y un escenario cuya comprensión y estudio ha estado dominado a lo largo de los últimos años, ¿no?, a lo largo o dentro de la historiografía dedicada a Picasso, ha estado dominado por tres temas. Por un lado, Breton y la lectura de un Picasso surrealista. En segundo lugar, el reportaje fotográfico que realizó Brassai sobre el artista y sus dos talleres, el de París en la calle Lavoisier y el de Boigeloup en Gisors, en Normandía, realizado este reportaje en diciembre de 1932. Y en tercer lugar, la pulsión creativo-sexual, también de orden, ¿no?, dentro de una perspectiva surrealista, esta pulsión creativa de su trabajo pictórico y escultórico en yeso, alimentada por su relación o interpretada desde su relación con María Teresa Walter. Estos tres ejes han sido repetidos ampliamente cuando se ha querido conocer el trabajo que Picasso realizó en ese taller y en esos años, ¿no?, sobre todo, principalmente, los primeros años de la década de los 30. Además, lo que sabemos del taller de escultura y de la identificación de ese espacio del taller de Boigeloup como un espacio de creación está mediado y dominado, ¿no?, por las fotografías de Brassai, que fueron publicadas en el primer número de la revista Minotaur. Sin embargo, y aquí se lanza una de esas muchas preguntas, ¿no?, que me hice al comienzo, ¿qué ocurre cuando rescatamos, leemos y estudiamos nuevos materiales de esa época y los enfrentamos a los ya conocidos? De manera que mi propósito para el focus, pero también, ¿no?, para la investigación que he desarrollado, ha sido ofrecer un relato más complejo en el que la obra de Picasso, en concreto la escultura realizada en yeso, quedara inserta en su tiempo y en su contexto histórico-cultural. Para ello he querido amplificar el binomio Picasso-Boigeloup a partir de tres aspectos. El primero, el papel que asume el taller para la práctica escultórica en yeso. En segundo, entender las implicaciones simbólicas, funcionales y estéticas del material empleado propiamente. Y tercero, extender esta revisión de Boigeloup y de Picasso, de esta relación, a toda la década de los años 30. Así, he vuelto a mirar las obras realizadas en yeso junto con las fotografías del taller de escultura de Boigeloup conservadas en los archivos privados de Picasso y los de Olga Ruiz Picasso, pero también de las tomadas por otros agentes, ¿no?, como Boris Kokno en 1931 o las realizadas por el estudio Wagner, Moreau et compagnie hacia 1934-35. La hipótesis de partida y que alimenta el foco, ¿no?, en el que he trabajado y que pueden ver en las galerías, en las salas, es que el trabajo de yeso en Picasso en la década de 1930, sin abandonar el principio de creación individual y apenas conocido públicamente entonces, se corresponde con un momento de reconsideración de los fundamentos del arte. No solo desde el punto de vista de los lenguajes o los estilos, esos debates de ese momento entre abstracción y figuración, entre idealismo y realismo, sino de su función social, desde la perspectiva de la defensa de las artes murales, sostenida por artistas y asociaciones creadas en los primeros años o en las décadas centrales de los años 30 en Francia. Por ejemplo, la asociación L'Art Mural, creada en 1934. O dicho de una manera más sintética, esa escultura de Picasso mayoritariamente podría participar de la defensa y práctica de una escultura arquitectónica, llamada a formar parte de un programa y dentro de un proyecto arquitectónico. Y por arquitectura podemos pensar un edificio, un espacio, algo, ¿no?, que, digamos, colectivo y público, ¿no?, y que podemos ver, ¿no?, por ejemplo, o a partir, ¿no? Está la hipótesis de partida o esta interpretación, ¿no? y aproximación, y que esto se puede, ¿no? Se concretiza en ejemplos como las diversas versiones de cabeza de mujer, o la escultura que realiza en 1933 la mujer con una jarra, o la mujer con el ramo de hojas de 1934. O también, y no olvidemos, el orador en yeso que realiza ese mismo año de 1934. Pero también este principio, ¿no? De una escultura arquitectónica se prolonga a su decisión, a la decisión de Picasso de incluir un grupo de esculturas en su participación en el Pabellón de España en la Exposición Internacional de París de 1937. De tal manera que la argumentación de mi hipótesis, ¿no? Voy estableciendo niveles, ¿no? De aproximación. La argumentación de mi hipótesis se apoya en varios temas, principios, discusiones y prácticas desarrolladas contemporáneamente a la realización de esas obras en yeso, con la voluntad, como decía antes, de contextualizarla. Uno de esos temas es el manuscrito Picasso y las catedrales, redactado por Julio González a comienzos de la década de 1930. En él, las reflexiones de González van intercaladas con postales de fachadas de iglesias góticas francesas. El título, Picasso y las catedrales, sitúa al artista conscientemente en la genealogía del escultor vinculado con la arquitectura, allí donde materia y espacio, estructura y floración orgánica se identifican. Y es aquí donde entran, ¿no? En juego en mi interpretación de los relieves de cabeza de mujer, ¿no? De los distintos relieves de cabeza de mujer de perfil que semejan una moldura, metopa o medallón destinado a una fachada. O, que algo más tardía, poco más tardía que estas obras, la mujer con hojas, ¿no? Con ese ramo de hojas, una escultura que integra en la selección de obras del foco que he desarrollado, ¿no? Es una escultura de un fuerte contenido sagrado y secular a la vez, y que continúa esta línea de reclamo de una arquitectura en la que insertarse. También en ella se reconocen las características de relieve y frontalidad de las esculturas de los portales de las iglesias góticas y que González subrayaba en su manuscrito. Y no olvidemos que ya desde el imaginario romántico, la catedral gótica es el paradigma de la obra colectiva. Es un monumento colectivo con un fuerte componente de defensa del trabajo manual y artesano, que necesita de la comunidad y se dirige a ella. Otro de los temas sobre los que sostengo, ¿no? Sobre los que he realizado mi revisión de la escultura en yeso de Picasso es la noción de la cultura clásica, la cultura griega clásica. Desde finales del siglo XIX se estaban llevando a cabo misiones arqueológicas estudiando el arte y la cultura griegas antigua, no solo desde una perspectiva arqueológico-científica, también en términos nacionales y de defensa de la perdurabilidad de la civilización griega y la cultura clásica. En este sentido, el carácter griego, como su arte y arquitectura, su valor y función, estaba siendo reexaminado en los años centrales de la década de 1930 como parte de un proyecto de mayor alcance para argumentar la práctica artística y arquitectónica modernas, de defensa de un hombre nuevo y un nuevo paradigma de armonía y de nuevo orden social a través de una nueva configuración espacial. Y vuelvo a la arquitectura. Esto es, lo clásico no era solo un lenguaje plástico o un conjunto de normas estéticas, sino un valor moral. Y valga recordar, por ejemplo, ¿no? El tercer Congreso Internacional de Arquitectura Moderna, celebrado en Atenas y que incluyó un viaje a las islas, a Atenas y a las islas del Mar Egeo, ¿no? Que se conserva un maravilloso documental de Moholy-Nagy de ese viaje. En esos años, y traigo aquí, ¿no? En esos años destaca la presencia de lo griego clásico en las revistas de arte modernas Y señalo ahora el artículo del historiador Fitzgerald, Palas Ateneas o el rostro de la Grecia, publicado en Cahiers d'Art en 1934. Ahí, Giedion apelaba a la centralidad del hombre en la cultura griega. Hacía un elogio del paisaje ateniense como escenario para el desarrollo de dicha cultura y del modelo ético del Partenón, y cito, testigo inevitable de la necesidad para las grandes civilizaciones de no separar sensibilidad e inteligencia. Y Giedion fue uno de esos viajeros, ¿no? de esa misión también, ¿no? del tercer Ciam en el viaje a Grecia. Se añade también a todo esto el papel crucial, ¿no? de Christian Zerbos a lo largo, ¿no? como en su trabajo editorial, a lo largo de la revista Cahiers d'Art, y en particular el volumen monográfico que publica en el año 34 titulado El arte en Grecia, profusamente ilustrado fotográficamente. Y como revelan estos textos, solo he mencionado dos, pero hay muchos otros, como revelan estos textos y aproximaciones, la categoría de clasicismo griego o gótico, también podemos ensanchar, ¿no? podemos amplificar los conceptos, se convierte en un principio válido con el que recobrar la confianza en el arte para recuperar la conciencia colectiva y desde el arte ocuparse de aquellos temas que permitieran reinstaurar la unidad entre el artista y el pueblo, como crítica a esa escisión que se había producido en los últimos años, en las últimas décadas, del artista respecto a su medio, ¿no? a la ciudad, al pueblo, a la civilización. Este es el contexto en el que se encuentra Picasso cuando elaboró su obra escultórica en yeso en Boigeloup, en esos primeros años de 1930. También cuando realizó el grueso de las estampas de la suite Volar y la serie de dibujos para ilustrar una edición del texto de Lisístrata de Aristófanes, y de que algunos de esos dibujos preparatorios forman parte de la exposición comisariada por Michael. El estudio atento y comparativo de la serie de dibujos para Lisístrata, estos ejemplos, no son los dibujos definitivos, realizados en noviembre de 1933, nos enseña que Picasso ensayó recursos y sistemas de organización, presentación, conexión y ritmo similares a los desarrollados en la construcción de los templos griegos, pero de un determinado espacio de los templos griegos. En esos dibujos, la antigüedad no es solo la fuente textual literaria sobre la que trabaja el artista, sino que Picasso asume el espíritu del escultor arquitectónico en su procedimiento. Así, la concepción de esos dibujos posee una voluntad narrativa y secuencial, un ajuste al espacio y una intención escultórica característica de las metopas de un frontón en un templo. Así, mediante estos nombres y ejemplos contemporáneos a la producción de la escultura en yeso, se podría reconocer un punto de contacto entre Picasso y el espíritu del arte de los griegos de la antigüedad, también con el espíritu de los constructores de catedrales góticas, en cuanto momentos de la civilización occidental en los que se elevaron obras colectivas destinadas al uso de una comunidad. Y por su parte, su trabajo, el de Picasso, se presentaría como la encarnación de unos principios éticos y sociales contenidos en los programas de esas arquitecturas en las que su escultura se incorporaría. Sea griego, sea gótico, ambos ámbitos ambos campos están regidos por el principio de integración de las artes. Con estos argumentos y apoyada en las fotografías que he mostrado antes y que algunas otras se reproducen en el foco, también en otros materiales, Las obras en yeso y las fotografías nos devuelven una imagen de Bois-Guillaume convertido en un taller de moldes y reproducciones. Ese taller de aquellos escultores donde se producían las obras, de esas canterías, ¿no? Si hablamos en términos o en un vocabulario específico del arte medieval, ¿no? Ese taller de moldes y reproducciones de una escultura que espera su arquitectura. Este principio del taller de yesos y moldes, así como la idea de la integración de las artes, se reactiva cuando Picasso recibe el encargo de participar en el Pabellón de España para la Exposición Internacional de 1937. El pabellón se presentaba como la ocasión para intervenir en un programa, en una obra colectiva, en una catedral laica, secular, bajo la acepción defendida en aquellos años. Como se sabe, para acometer el encargo, Picasso no solo alquiló el estudio de la calle de los Grandes Agustinos en París a comienzos de 1937, sino que también regresó a Bois-Guillaume para, desde la escultura, reforzar su colaboración en un proyecto que era revolucionario y de propaganda. Así, Picasso no solo entregó el gran lienzo que quedó titulado Guernica, sino que también envió 5 esculturas, 4 de las cuales fueron producidas en cemento a partir de ejemplos y obras realizadas anteriormente en yeso. Esta es mi conclusión y aportación ahora al estudio de Picasso. El artista, como muchos de sus contemporáneos, entrevió que el yeso, el cemento y la piedra eran los materiales que contenían la promesa de que la escultura participaría de nuevo en un arte colectivo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Dr. Robles Tardillo. Blair Hartzell, our next speaker, is an independent art historian and curator who manages a private collection in Paris currently. Prior to this, she worked for 7 years in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where she contributed to a number of important exhibitions. She is also the co-editor of Picasso, The Making of Cubism, 1912 to 1914. And she will be speaking on the subject of her focus exhibition, From Studio to Salon, Picasso and the Liberation of Paris.
Thank you, Ross. I would like to offer my thanks to Bernard Ruiz Picasso and to Michael Fitzgerald for the opportunity to work with this wonderful group of scholars and the team at FABA and the wonderful staff here at the Museo Picasso Malaga. Thank you all. This evening, I would like to discuss Picasso's still life work in the summer of 1944 and to consider, through several archival photographs, its display in the autumn of 1944. The years of the occupation were, for Picasso, aptly summarized by his longtime friend, the great photographer Lee Miller. There was nothing to do except work and struggle for food and see one's friends quietly and to look forward to the day of freedom. Picasso was remarkably productive throughout the dark years of the war, creating a few thousand works across all mediums. Approximately 150 of these were still life paintings, of which still life with jug, glass, and orange is one modest yet significant example. It hangs upstairs on the second floor of the exhibition on loan from FABA. It was made during the summer of 1944, a season bracketed by the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6th and the liberation of Paris on August 25th. It is the first and largest of a series of small canvases devoted to a plain pitcher, a glass, and a piece of fruit. And it is dated to July 19th, one day after American forces had captured the pivotal town of Saint-Lô, which would provide an avenue for the Allies to advance toward Paris. It is a somewhat traditional still life, insofar as it reminds us of the fleeting nature of life, that the fruit will always decay, and the artist used a very standard size canvas of plain weave cotton. The color palette is acidic, a little burnt, there's a mustardy lime color, a muddy terracotta, forest green, a little shot of blue. The painted surface is not especially built up, appearing quite dry and brushy in areas. A notable exception is the swirling accumulation of oil paint to make the orange. The composition is mostly angular and awkward, save for the sinuous curves of the jug. The tilted Cézannean table and the objects resting on it exist in a space of fractured planes of color, everything crunched together in a scene without much air or context. The bold black lines added over the passages of color carve up the scene while also serving to somehow connect these disparate objects and lock them together. There is, I think, something touchingly human about painting a small series of still life works, to hone in on this simple arrangement, to narrow one's focus to the tabletop, while there is so much uncertainty, fear, chaos, and hope in the world just outside this canvas. Picasso observed, "I have not painted the war, but I have no doubt that the war is in these paintings I have done." It was, I think, not a work likely to dazzle or astound, though in the weeks and months that followed its creation, this painting was seen by an astonishing number of people. That long-awaited day of freedom came. There was jubilation on the streets of Paris and within Picasso's life. Though he was at the time living primarily at his studio in the Rue des Grands Augustins, in the final days of fighting in the streets of Paris, he stayed with his daughter Maya and her mother Marie-Thérèse on the Ile Saint-Louis. The Germans surrendered on August 25th, and the following days were filled with these triumphant parades and celebrations. One of his first visitors back at his studio was Lee Miller, not surprising as she was both an old friend and an important embedded wartime photojournalist. The title of her article, "In Paris, Picasso Still at Work," was, I think, not just a faint echo of the British wartime slogan, "Keep calm and carry on." It was meaningful to many people that Picasso and his art, this pillar of modern culture, had survived when so many lives and so much culture had been lost or destroyed. And it was not just old friends like Lee Miller who came knocking on his door. A visit to Picasso's studio became quickly, in the autumn of 1944, a kind of sacred pilgrimage for people, the Allies, to make. Here we see a cluster of soldiers examining Picasso's recent work, and I would especially enjoy the way those soldiers' heads frame the still life from July 19th. In this photo by Robert Capa, who only weeks prior had photographed the experience of landing at Omaha Beach with Allied forces. In this next set of photographs by Cecil Beaton, you see suddenly that many days it wasn't just a trickle of soldiers knocking on Picasso's door. Some days it was a deluge. Picasso said to the photographer Brassai at the time, "Yes, it was an invasion. Paris was liberated, but I was and I remain besieged." And, of course, the question is, what work did these visitors see when they climbed the narrow staircase up to his studio? They saw works like Picasso's Summer Still Life series. At a glance, you may notice Picasso's serial interrogation of light versus shadow, figure versus ground is emphasized in this particular arrangement. His every formulation of an idea, his reversals and substitutions and rhymes can be judged against one another here. These works bring to my mind the Cubist still life works of 1914. Perhaps Picasso had revived a Cubist language that had been lying dormant for some years, and perhaps this was a moment in which for Picasso, Cubism was the best means to paint what he wanted to express. One can begin to think expansively about these connections, reflections, and transformations across Picasso's long career in the way in which the exhibition overall encourages us to. These works were also exhibited at the Autumn Salon in 1944, which was christened the Salon de la Libération. It was a triumphant cultural moment for newly free France. As you can see, I really like the tricolor catalog there for the show. Picasso exhibited 74 paintings and 5 sculptures and attended the openings, and he also loaned a very beautiful 1943 still life by Matisse from his collection. At this point in history, Picasso had already been famous for many decades, and people have always loved to make studio visits to see that magical place where the artist's alchemy is performed. But in this moment, he became a symbol. He transcended all manner of ordinary fame. And I think that this is something remarkable for an artist and their studio to carry such symbolic importance. I would also like to encourage visitors to occasionally think of the life of a work of art before before it got to the freshly painted, beautifully lit museum wall on which they now encounter it. To think of the studio, the early exhibitions, where it was published, the eyes that saw it before our own. The work I have presented tonight is, I think, not a grand history painting, not by any stretch. But when I think of the moment in which that still life was painted and the many eyes that saw it in the autumn of 1944, I realize that this painting is more so a kind of quiet witness to history. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Our next and last speaker, Giovanni Cassini, is a junior assistant professor at the University of Turin. He holds a doctoral degree from the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, and his research on the dealer Léonce Rosenberg and interwar modernism has been supported by fellowships from the Center for Italian Modern Art in New York, as well as the Metropolitan Museum's Leonard A. Lauder Research Center for Modern Art. His book, Léonce Rosenberg's Cubism, the Galerie L'Effort Moderne in Interwar Paris, was very recently published by Penn State University in October 2023. He also curated a related exhibition, which is on view right now at the Musée Picasso Paris until May 19th. The topic of his talk and his focus exhibition is The Path to Creation, the UNESCO mural.
Good evening. Thank you all for still being here first, because I realize it's getting quite late. And I thank you also for the introduction. I also join the other scholars in thanking Bernard Picasso, Michael Fitzgerald, the team of FABA, and of course the team of the Museo Picasso Malaga, who all made this possible. Let's get this started. So. In 1969, the renowned Swiss publisher Albert Schira turned the idea of unraveling the path behind artistic creation into a book series, Les Sentiers de la Création, a pursuit which lies behind the title and concept of the focus exhibition I curated here at the Museo Picasso Malaga. Here you see one of these books, and I will explain, of course, why I'm showing that. The instigator of that very idea, so exploring creation as a kind of a path, had been Pablo Picasso himself, when one day at the Château de Boisjolou, Schira witnessed some found pieces of wire and wood transformed into sculpture by the artist's creative effervescence. In one of the books produced for this series, Schira assigned the art critic Gaëtan Picon the task of describing, by collecting and commenting the over 80 preparatory drawings and studies that exist, the creative process behind the largest and arguably highest profile work in Picasso's whole career. 1 second, it's a heavy image, so it takes a second. So a mural commissioned for the recently built headquarters of the United Nations Scientific and Cultural Organization, also known more easily as UNESCO in Paris, a painting that came to be known as The Fall of Icarus. So the focus exhibition El Camino hacia la Creación, featuring throughout its length multiple rotations of these beautiful and often fragile works on paper, allows the visitor to understand this path as well as contextualizes the UNESCO Commission in Picasso's life and career. Sorry for this. Okay, great. It took nearly 2 years since the initial proposal made to Picasso by UNESCO officials in October 1955 for the artist to effectively embark in December 1957 on the labor journey that would lead to unveiling the monumental mural painting made of 40 distinct plywood panels personally painted by Picasso in the courtyard of a school in the town of Vallauris on March 29, 1958, an event that, as you can see from these 2 photographs, was extensively documented by the press. Of course, the great absent in the exhibition here in the museum is the actual UNESCO painting, which is larger than the screen, which is some gives you a sense of how big it is, and of course it's impossible to move it. And so the actual painting is evoked in the museum, in the galleries, by photographs accompanying the wall text. In my essay for the museum's forthcoming catalogue, I discuss at length the key role played by its architectural setting and the way the mural can still be experienced today when visiting UNESCO in Paris. Built between 1955 and 1958, UNESCO House, Maison de l'UNESCO, was designed by Marcel Breuer with the Italian Pierluigi Nervi and the French Bernard Zerfus, and was one of those major modernist architectural projects to be realized in the wake of the Second World War and as part of the general reconstruction after the war. Given that it was hoped that the headquarters would become an expression of a totalizing union of the arts, the issue of the works of art that would be commissioned was central, and Picasso was selected, I must say, not without intense debates, as the archival documents show, for one of the most prominent locations, the lobby of the General Conference Building. When he set to work on the UNESCO project, Picasso had already relocated to southern France and was living in Villa La Californie in Cannes. However, as we've seen, the mural was unveiled in Vallauris, a fact which bespeaks the still strong connection Picasso had to the town and its ceramic manufacturers. Archival documents show, in fact, that Picasso initially conceived the Fall of Icarus as a set of ceramic panels, which surely would have been realized in the atelier of his longtime collaborators, Georges and Suzanne Ramier, and it's of course the Atelier Madura, and that he wanted to create a work in black and white tones mostly. Could it be, I wonder, that the falling figure at the center of the final composition, which you see enlarged here, the so-called Icarus, had been lingering in Picasso's mind since these preliminary ideas, inspired by the use of black and white that characterizes some biomorphic ceramics created in Vallauris, such as insect, presented for this reason in the exhibition. After considerable pressure from UNESCO officials, Picasso finally started sketching out his ideas in December 1957, developing the iconography through the end of January 1958. The evolution from the initial solution of an indoor atelier scene in the wake of his contemporary works inspired by Velázquez's Las Meninas, and here you see the very first study we have, and which is now on view in the galleries. So the evolution from that subject to the final maquette, which you also see here and also in the gallery for this iteration of the three studies. So as you can see, this evolution from kind of a scene that takes place indoors to the outdoors of the beach is very dramatic. The studio space of the early studies is that of La Californie, evoked in the exhibition for this reason by the painting La Californie interior with red armchair. In a rather unusual manner, given the continuous flow of visitors to La Californie, Picasso kept his work on the UNESCO Commission out of sight, making these studies an essential resource. One could say that to break the ice, Picasso resorted to the favored theme of a model reclining in an artist's atelier, the space of artistic creation itself and the comfort zone, a place that had also been his point of departure for Guernica. However, the word of the beach, which eventually came to dominate the composition, was present from the very beginning, but through a sort of visual figure of speech, so to say. So in the middle of the space of the atelier stands a canvas. Here you see a detail of one of the studies, which is also, in this case, presented in the galleries. So in the middle of the space stands a canvas on an easel, easily identifiable, especially with a slide like this, with an actual painting, Bathers at La Garoupe, painted in 1957, depicting a group of sculptures made from recycled wooden planks and created in 1956. If this canvas is a self-citation, so it's like a painting within a painting, in the sense it's a figure of speech, I say, these figures are mediated in multiple ways. They are painted or drawn equivalents of Picasso's first and only sculptural ensemble, so the Bathers that you see here today in their wooden version at the Schatzgalerie Stuttgart. Photographs by David Douglas Duncan demonstrate how, in the studio at La Californie, Picasso lit these planar sculptures, subsequently translating their projected shadows into painting on canvas. The boundaries between the two media almost vanish clearly. While not part of this ensemble, Standing Woman, the work you see here, is included in the exhibition to demonstrate how the artist had started to adopt assemblage and salvaged wood to produce sculptures a few years before. Some of the rotations that will be presented throughout the duration of the exhibition will spotlight specific characters in the UNESCO composition. One such example is the female nude, whose body is first cubistically reduced to a set of faceted planes. For example, as you can see in this ephemeral drawing on tracing paper, acquiring then more sinuous shapes in the studies from January 1958, only to regain flatness in the final mural in the figure at the left, a detail you see her here. So it's this woman shown playing in the water. Her arms are outstretched at either side, while her truncated legs suggest that she might be standing in water up to her knees. The flatness of this whimsical bather anticipates Picasso's late sheet metal sculptures, an example of which, Woman with Outstretched Arms, is on view, and that's her. So, if a monochromatic range of blacks and whites had dominated Picasso's early studies, suddenly between January 7th and 8th, 1958, color is vividly reintroduced. Simplifying the better compositions to the soul diver on the springboard, Picasso briefly replaced it with the shadow of the artist, ominously inhabiting the canvas at the center of the atelier. And you see here, like from the kind of the diver to, and there's a whole theory about this identification, which I talk more about in my essay. When, at some unspecified moment around mid-January 1958, over a month after the first studies, Picasso radically altered the iconography and decided to shift the scene from indoors to outdoors, he also adopted a new working method. The composition was structured like a puzzle of cut-out elements pinned onto a large drawing functioning as a maquette. We have seen it already. And many of these cutouts only survive thanks to Picon's book, the one I showed at the beginning. And so you see here, he was able to reproduce the maquette with the cutouts still kind of pinned onto it. Some of the cutouts still survive, but very few, unfortunately. Sorry, it's Okay. None of the preparatory drawings, and especially a series of January 25, which flows almost like a cartoon strip, explicitly supports the idea that Picasso had the myth of Icarus in mind during the execution of the commission for UNESCO. In the ones you see here, an asexualized bird-like figure is falling into water, rendered in the second as reiterated blue lines. A rather cartoonish diver, I would say, approaching the sea surface, as you can see here. The reading as Icarus, therefore, remains unlikely in my view, and is a layer of meaning which was added only retrospectively, but mostly it's Georges Sal's fault. Georges Sal was an old friend of Picasso, by 1958 head of the Musée de France, and member of UNESCO's Artistic Advisory Committee, the so-called CAA. So it was Georges Sal who proposed this reading at the mural's inauguration, as he tried to give it a classical pedigree, not least as a way to reassure the perplexed commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cassini, and thank you all for those fascinating presentations, giving us a taste of your focus exhibitions. What we've just heard from our 5 focus curators and from Michael Fitzgerald is really just a preview of longer, in-depth scholarly essays that will appear in the forthcoming catalog to the exhibition, Structures of Invention, a Unity of a Life's Work. In the next and less formal phase of tonight's program, we will have a roundtable conversation between us and offer the audience the opportunity to ask questions about topics about what you've just heard, which may have piqued your interest. But first, we will take a 10-minute break to stretch our legs and absorb everything that we've heard. So please come back and join us for the next section of the program tonight. Thank you. You guys up in the booth? Hi. Yes, could I ask you to load Michael Fitzgerald's presentation, please? Thank you. Well, thank you for coming back for the next and last phase of tonight's program. And we'd like to bring our scholars in conversation with one another. They have been working on their research topics for well over a year under Michael's guidance. And they know their topics even better than I do. So we hope that we can get them to talk a bit and connect their work to the broader theme of the exhibition. Along those lines, we all have the pleasure of being gathered here in Malaga. And for those of us who come from places that are less warm and sunny, it is truly a pleasure indeed to be here in the birthplace of Pablo Picasso, where we have recently commemorated both the 50th anniversary of his death, the artist's death in 1973, as well as the 20th anniversary of the birth of this museum in 2003. And so it feels appropriate to open our discussion, maybe thinking about beginnings and endings, some of the very earliest works by Picasso in our exhibition, and some of the very latest. And Michael, if I may, I'd like to ask you, what attracted you to the very early works that we have in the exhibition? The portrait of Lola from 1896, circa, that we have on the screen. Of course, the moody image of a bearded man made by Picasso in La Coruña a little bit earlier. And of course, the very mysterious and kind of gritty street scene that we have also from the Barcelona period. What drew you to these works? How do they relate to the very late examples of Picasso's work that we have in the exhibition.
Well, thank you, Ross. I think in a sense what you're asking is how the exhibition came about, how we came up with the topic. And like many things that are happening now, it really was an outgrowth of COVID. I started working with Bernard in March of 2020. I was in Paris at that time and soon fled back to New York. So we all scattered to our sanctuaries, wherever they might be. But through the beauties of the internet, I could look at images, I could study what was in Fabio's collection, which I did not know well at all at that point. And really, I had a year just to sort through and examine through photographs what the collection was, to learn about it, and to begin to see patterns within it. Because I knew that there would be an exhibition. I did not yet know that I would be the curator, but it would be an exhibition that would be drawn from the joint collections of the museum and of FAVA. There would not be additional loans. And so it's unlike other exhibitions I'd organized where I could pick precisely this work and that work from one museum or another. Here, I had a remarkable set of works, but I had to make some sense of it. What would work within the availability of images? And we began to see patterns as we were looking at the work, and particularly, given our awareness that these were pictures that Picasso had kept with him all of his life, relationships that were potential within them. But I do emphasize that we're not trying to pick sources for pictures. This comparison that we begin with is not, in our minds, specifically a source image for the later one, but rather trying to define continuities, patterns of thought that seem to reflect his own creative process. Ultimately, it was about trying to present to the audience something that they might be able to use to inject themselves, at least imaginatively, into the way in which Picasso worked, the way in which he drew on so many different sources. And this seemed to be a striking comparison. To a certain extent, we simply wanted to provoke people a bit, to present a real difference that we might, with some thought, begin to make a continuity, but certainly begin with difference, but with enough potential elements that it could grow into a broader sense of understanding. So I think that's kind of how it came about.
And talking about, is that on? Yeah, thinking about sources, Josh, thanks to you, we have 3 wonderful examples of Picasso, of works of African sculpture that Picasso collected, that were in his collection. And your talk gave us a taste of what scholars have said about his encounters with non-Western African art. Picasso, of course, also had a few statements about that, well known to some of us, but perhaps not to the audience, to our audience here or online. And I thought this would maybe be a good opportunity to bring Picasso's voice into the conversation. Françoise Gillot, for example, records Picasso telling her about his visit to the Trocadero Museum. And this is how she quotes Picasso about that moment in his life. When I went for the first time at Duran's urging to the Trocadero Museum, the smell of dampness and rot stuck in my throat. It depressed me so much I wanted to get out fast, but I stayed and studied. Men had made masks and other objects for a sacred purpose, a magic purpose, as a kind of mediation between themselves and the unknown hostile forces that surround them, in order to overcome their fear and horror by giving it a form and an image. And on another occasion, describing the same experience to André Malraux, Picasso apparently said of these tribal artworks and sculptures, they were weapons to help people avoid coming under the influence of spirits again, to help them become independent, their tools. If we give spirits a form, we become independent. Spirits, the unconscious, emotion, they're all the same thing. I understood why I was a painter, all alone in that awful museum with masks, dolls made by the Redskins, dusky mannequins. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon must have come to me that very day, but not at all because of the forms, because it was my first exorcism painting. Yes, absolutely. Josh, you've worked on this topic. I would just love to get your response to these words of Picasso. What do they reveal, and perhaps what do they conceal about his encounters with African art?
Yeah, that's great, and it's helpful for everyone to hear the account from Picasso himself in two different versions. I think you can see a few things from these statements. The dampness and rot of the Trocadero, I think that was real. It was a museum that was quite neglected. There was not a lot of funding for this museum. It wasn't open regularly. Certainly wasn't open every day of the week. You couldn't quite tell when it would be open. It was just not a museum that had a lot of funding or prestige. So the idea to go there to think about any kind of aesthetic experience or artistic inspiration would have been probably laughable, and which is why Picasso was very daring in this respect, and a lot of people made fun of him when they saw Les Demoiselles that just didn't understand what he was doing. It reflects a certain, I would say, sort of received understanding of African art as a patropaic, sort of having this spiritual sort of anti-witchcraft function, which not all African art does have, it's important to note, but through that idea, I think, and seeing a certain value in a kind of object like that, he was able to transform what he considered to be his role as a painter, in the way he said, I understood why I was a painter, so that his paintings are not just about forms, actually. They're not just about themes or subject matter. It's about an emotional battle in a certain way. Probably, we would say the battle with his own demons. But then there's also another crucial aspect from the art historical standpoint, which is saying not at all because of the forms. So he wants to place the emphasis on the spiritual side of this encounter, which deflects attention from the formal borrowings, which is sort of the correction that I've tried to make, as those who know me well are very familiar with my spiel about primitivism and all that.
What do we know about what Picasso knew about the function of these ritual objects, for those that were ritual objects, for the cultures that made them? What kind of information would have been available to him? Would that have mattered, do you think, to Picasso?
So I don't think he had much of a conception beyond what we've already identified. There was anthropological literature available and so on. Some scholars have posited, almost seemingly with certainty, that Picasso was relying on a book by the German anthropologist Frobenius. We don't have any evidence of that. From what I know, I welcome any tips, but as far as I know, Picasso was not reading the literature on, was not up to date on, Africanist literature. So I don't think he really knew much about what the works did.
Meta, your work, your research brings us into the 1920s, a period when the style of Picasso's work alternated between and combined aspects of classicism, cubism, surrealism, as demonstrated in the exhibition, and when his output was extremely varied across media. And I'm thinking of you working within this extremely productive and varied period of his life. How did you come to focus, I'm very curious, on small wood panels? Can you tell us anything about the origin of your fascination with this material and with this rather special category of objects?
Well, the origin was very simple. It came from a simple observation that here they were, these works that were tiny and they were on wood. I came to observation while I was thinking about the broader subject of size and scale in Picasso's works. I had made a list of works that I found particularly interesting in the Fabus collection, and looking at them, I noticed that the smallest ones were on wood, and so it started. First, I had identified just a couple of them, and then I started going back and then going forth, and so I established the categories that would existed in different moments of his career, but it was always moments like islands, like moments when he explored wood, and then for a year or two or a summer, and then he would not for a couple of years or 10 years. So this I found fascinating. And then, of course, as it was a focus exhibition, not a huge exhibition, I was unable to explore more groups. So that is why the suggestion is to look deeper, slower to this group, which is a group of 4 works from the 20s, and then adding a group from 1906 and then from the 30s to say there is much more. And obviously plywood, there is a lot to be done. When plywood enters, which is another story, it can be considered a kind of wood, but it is very different, and the panels tend to be large rather than small. So there would be another wood story if we move further.
One thing that really surprised me in your presentation was the use of that Giotto painting. Once you put it up there, I saw everything else through the lens of that Giotto, and I'm so glad that you also used the, of course, painting of Fernand from Gossol. That's in the exhibition, on that fascinating discovery that it's on the headboard of a child's bed. And I'm thinking about Giotto and the Madonna with her mantle over her head, and there's Fernand with the mantilla. That work, of course, as you know, was just exhibited at Reina Sofia in the Picasso 1906 exhibition, where one could study it in relation to Romanesque sculpture that Picasso could have seen when he was there at Gossol. But I think you opened up something interesting with the late medieval, early Renaissance panel painting. So, yeah, just an observation. Rocio, the 1930s is the time when Picasso becomes very actively involved in European politics, which you point out, for the first time. And he allows his art for the first time, painting and sculpture, to be used and exhibited in the service of left-wing political causes in France and in Spain, as you've discussed. This is a major change in Picasso's life, and one that comes just a few years after his embrace of plaster as a sculptural medium in the works made at Boisgelou, which you showed us, and some others that are in the exhibition. And I think that your topic and your work invites us to think about Picasso's politics in relation to his work in plaster and vice versa. And could you say anything about that relationship? Elaborate a little bit?
Okay, thank you, Ross, for your question. I think that one of the ideas or one of my interests in this topic also is to develop to develop a more complex idea that we have, a more complex idea about the political engagement of Picasso. So not only to reduce it to Guernica or to that year, the 1937, but how to explore the whole 30s as a field, no, as a period in which we can, where we could identify some project or some works that could be related with this political and social engagement that are common, or that we can consider, no, that are more evidence in other artists, French artists or artists that are working in Paris in that years. So the political engagement is not only related, and this is my view and my approach to Picasso's work, the plaster sculpture. It's not only related with the subject of the works, with a topic, but with the material. So, and for that reason is political engagement, but social engagement, because this work could be, if we read it, no, if we interpret the plaster sculpture in this context of the defense of murals arts, no, not only mural arts in plural, we can consider, no, the plaster sculpture has the spirit, we can say, no, the spirit of this engagement, no, a potential, the potentiality to be a work of art related to a space, public space, to a cathedral, to a modern cathedral, no, as was the Spanish pavilion, no, in the Paris International Fair. I don't know. Yeah, and what Picasso say is just to translate into in concrete, no? It's just to make, no, the sculpture in concrete is a more durable, no, most established material, no? And probably is in this connection, in this when establishing this relationship between the Gothic cathedral, the facade of the Gothic cathedral, and the sculpture that Picasso put in the outside of the Spanish pavilion. When it's from that I dare to say that there is in these sculptures we can find also a political and social engagement of Picasso. I don't know if I have answered your question.
You have indeed, thank you. And Picasso's social and political engagements and commitments, they evolved through the 30s and into, of course, the 1940s and the period of the Second World War, which the period that you talk about, Blair. And you know, Michael showed a slide that I would like to go back to and ask you about, if I may, because your research, although it concentrates on just a few months of Picasso's life and work, I think it seems to have broader implications about Cubism, the meaning, the definition, the various iterations of Cubism that he used throughout his career. And I know that's something you have worked on, different periods of Cubism in your career, in your museum work. And I thought that this comparison of the stark World War II period still life that you discussed and elaborated on so well made such a stark juxtaposition with this 1914 more florid and sort of Baroque variation of Cubism. What did you think about this when you saw this one?
Thank you, Ross. I have long been interested in thinking about sort of different kinds of Cubism, not just chronologically, but Gertrude Stein in her 1938 slender, wonderful little book about Picasso. I think she talks a little bit about the Cubism of landscapes, which is very Cubism of bodies, faces, and then there's the Cubism of the still life. Like there is something different that he's doing in each of those. And I had noticed very much that the still life work of spring, summer 1914 is spiraling completely out of control. He is trying everything imaginable, and so scholars call it Baroque Cubism or Rococo or confetti or whatever. We're trying to find out everything, but I use not a art historical term. I just say this is a completely bonkers Cubism. He's just having fun. He's really spiraling out, and that in my mind had always there was a noticeable difference. Then after the outbreak of World War I, there's this very tight, almost bland series of watercolors that he makes of a group of musical instruments on a tabletop. And he makes dozens of them. And you look through the catalog raisonné and you think, this is this very focused, confined, what is he doing in Montrouge, as his friend, as Braque and Derain and Apollinaire as they're going off to fight in World War I. The juxtaposition between the restaurant and these very quiet, tight watercolors had always stuck in my mind. And so then when I started thinking about the still life work of the 1940s, it really, there was in a way an echo of that tense focus, that feeling that you're looking at the tabletop and you're going to keep your Cubism there because everything beyond it is, he at this moment cannot paint it. But then I think, as he said, eventually it is there and you see it there, and I think you see it, you finally see the slightly broader picture in works like the Charnel House and the Charnier, where there is the tabletop up in the corner, but then there is also the gruesomeness of war there.
Giovanni, you've told the story of the evolution of Picasso's largest work there at the UNESCO mural. But could you tell us a little bit about how you built this story, the resource materials that you used? I know you had access to some very rare archival material in order to put this together. Could you tell us a little bit about your methodology in putting together your work?
Sure, thank you for the question, Ross. So my work basically developed firstly thanks to the preparatory drawings that I was able to look at very closely, because most of those are in Faber's collection, and so that was kind of one of the main sources, because also, like I said in my presentation, there's basically very few there's tons of photographs of La Californie during those years, but there's like a handful of photos of the panel. I found one photo of Picasso actually working on the panels that would compose the mural, and there's like a couple more of the panels lying in the studio. So there's something really kind of impenetrable about that laboratory. I call it like almost like a Faustian laboratory, like that when Picasso is like developing these ideas. But in something that I do more extensively in my essay is try to understand how you see that almost from the very beginning there's a grid that structures the drawings, and that's of course the very structure that the final mural would have. So it's like 40 different panels that were meant to be painted in the south of France, easily transported to Paris and then assembled in situ. So there's always, when I started reading more of the literature, there's very little literature, by the way, on the mural, there's this thing that this observation that is reiterated constantly, that Picasso had no awareness, wasn't interested at all in the kind of the site where his mural was gonna go, and so it was like given this really bad spot, because like I hope you will have some time and opportunity to go to UNESCO, but it is this kind of the modernist architecture is very intrusive, and but that's almost given as a reason to prove that Picasso was not didn't kind of collaborate at all with the institution and with the team of architects that was involved in the project. And as I then started doing archival research at the UNESCO itself, I found a lot of materials that kind of prove that Picasso was actually aware of that architectural context. He was sent like plans of the building, photos of the construction site, a maquette, and generally, even though Picasso's voice as always tends to be missing, you have the impression that it was really involved in the process of conceiving the structure of the mural itself. And eventually I got to kind of realize that he kind of maybe a bit reluctantly, but he accepted and eventually collaborated on conceiving this structure itself, which for him was a challenge, because it was the idea of not having like the complete view of the mural never, basically, until it was installed in Valoris for the first time, was a real challenge. But that structure, archival evidence shows that it was kind of conceived in collaboration with the UNESCO architectural team. So it's like it's hard to think about Picasso doing his own things at La Californie with no awareness of the UNESCO building, like one of the major, like the greatest modernist architecture built in after the Second World War. It's like something that I found unlikely, and so I think the kind of the archival material that I found was able to really kind of overturn a bit that idea.
So. You're, if I understand correctly, Picasso did take into account the site and the challenges that it presented. What about, to what degree did he take into account, if I could press you to ask, the mission of UNESCO when devising or thinking about the subject of the mural itself? You doubt the idea that he intended it to be the fall of Icarus. Could you say anything about what he might have intended, and any feelings you have about the subject and why he chose this subject for this difficult commission?
Sure. So yeah, I kind of made it quite clear that I don't think Picasso had this kind of mythological interpretation in mind as he was conceiving this mural, and I must also, something I didn't say was that it was heavily criticized, that mural, and is still, I would say, given the size, one of the least appreciated works in Picasso's whole career. That's also, I guess, because as much as prestigious, the location is a bit hard to access for the general public. But I think, he at that point, he was kind of still friendly with the French Communist Party. The fact that he then accepted to collaborate with an organization that belonged to the United Nations was not. I got the feeling that it was not very kind of particularly appreciated by also the kind of the leader of the Communist Party. But at the same time, Picasso kind of didn't care too much about those kind of the politics of the commission itself. It's true that it never kind of it truly in terms of the subject itself. I think it literally did what he wanted. You get the impression that, you know, the UNESCO officials were literally chasing him at exhibitions in Cannes, and it's like a movie. And Picasso, you have letters where they say, you had just left. I came to your exhibition. I couldn't meet. So it's like Picasso is truly doing whatever he wants, and even like when this interpretation, which is it's basically just Georges Sale who says it first at the inauguration of the mural in Vallauris, and then develops it a bit when the mural is installed at the UNESCO. And I think Picasso liked to kind of get over like the criticism that he was already starting to receive. It just even in the statements, it just says, and George Sale is right. I agree. It's like it's Icarus, but I mean, honestly, I haven't found particular evidence to prove that. And I think that is the main problem: the fact that, you know, any organization that's devoted to the like promoting peace, then kind of painting that image with that black kind of a skeleton-like figure at the center. It's hard to see it in line with what the organization was, its goals, its aims. So I think that eventually Picasso was truly doing his own thing, and then that interpretation was built to kind of made it acceptable.
I'd like to open the conversation now to the audience and open up to questions from our in-person audience or those online. There are some folks with microphones in the aisles, so if you'd like to, please just raise your hand and they'll come to you. Any questions? And if not, that's fine too. Yes, Michael, please.
Sorry, yes. Giovanni, for the preparatory drawings for the mural, I know that there are many, many, many of them, and they all sort of follow the same track until that last one where he turns on a dime and it's completely different. How did you choose the examples to include in the show?
In the exhibition, you mean?
Yeah.
So it's true that in this case, the first rotation, I thought I would show the very first that exists, the last, and one of the kind of that moment. Truly, they are all done on a day in January, the 7th, if I'm not mistaken. Where after, since like the first drawings, it's truly very much in line with Guernica, but that day, color is like so kind of violently introduced. So I wanted to show those three key moments. That's like kind of very basic in some sense. It's like the beginning, the end, and kind of a turning point. But you're right that then it's only Picasso that knows what went on towards the 20th of January when he scrapped entirely the idea of the atelier, and it turns into unfortunately that's
I was wondering. I mean, I know that I'm vaguely remembering discourse about Cold War imagery and irradiated figures and the bomb and that kind of thing. But you haven't found in your research any event that might have happened that he was responding to with that change?
Sorry, no, not specifically. I mean, there's I think the Sputnik satellite is kind of launched into the space, I would say, around those days. So, I mean, that's an interpretation that's been kind of put forward, but I don't know whether, there's no kind of historical event that I was able to identify.
Thanks.
Well, if that's it, I would like to thank our presenters one last time for giving us a wonderful preview of their work and of the exhibition overall. And thank you all for being with us for tonight's program. I hope you all see the exhibition many times and return. You'll have 3 years to see it many times. I know I'll be back a lot, and I hope you will too. So thank you all, and good night.